Alan Watts used to say that in life, forcing is like trying to grab water with your hands. The harder you squeeze, the faster it escapes. It was with phrases like this that he became the link between Eastern wisdom and Western thought. In studying Wu Wei, a Taoist principle that means acting without forcing, Watts not only explained an ancient philosophy, he translated it into how we live, work, and even seek to prosper. And perhaps this is the missing piece in the puzzle of your life, realizing that much of what you want is not achieved with more force, but with less resistance. How many times have you believed you needed to control every detail, only to realize that life had other plans? What if the secret wasn't fighting against the current, but learning to flow with it? Wu Wei isn't about inertia, but about getting into the right rhythm, where things seem to happen naturally, effortlessly, almost as if they're drawn to you. In the next few minutes, we'll dive into the illusion of control that keeps so many people trapped and discover how Watts' philosophy can free not only your mind, but also open space for abundance to come to you. If this message has already started to stir up your way of seeing the world, subscribe, leave your like, and tell us in the comments, when was the last time you felt that, by letting go of control, something better happened? Alan Watts pointed to a paradox that almost everyone ignores. The more we try to control life, the more unpredictable it becomes. He compared the human being to an exhausted swimmer who fights against the current until drowning, when in fact, it would be enough to float to reach the shore. Wu Wei reminds us that there is a natural flow happening all the time, and that trying to dominate it is like trying to catch the wind. It's useless, but in the West we learn from an early age that winning is synonymous with constant effort, with never stopping, with suffocating any pause. And so we confuse action with anxiety, planning with obsession. This is where neuroscience begins to meet ancestral wisdom. Research shows that when the brain enters a state of attentive relaxation, that point where we are present but not tense, creativity increases, decisions are clearer, and even social connections flow more easily. In other words, a relaxed mind is not a passive mind. It is an open, receptive mind, capable of perceiving opportunities that previously went unnoticed. And here comes one of the foundations of the law of attraction that few people understand. You don't attract what you want when you're desperate to get it. You attract when you are in harmony with what you desire, when your energy is aligned with the frequency of what you seek. Excessive control blocks this harmony. Conscious surrender, on the other hand, creates space for what is yours to find its way to you. Our next step is to understand why this surrender is not synonymous with giving up, and how, according to Watts, it is possible to act without getting lost in the effort. Alan Watts said that living is like playing an instrument. It's not about rushing to the last note, but about being present in every sound. But what do? We spend our whole lives trying to speed up the music, forcing the melody to fit our rhythm, and then we wonder why it sounds dissonant. Wu Wei, on the contrary, teaches that the most powerful action is born from harmony with the present moment. It's not laziness nor conformism. It's realizing that when you force less, you act better. Imagine pushing a door that actually opens by pulling. The more you force, the more it resists, and life is full of these doors that only open when we stop fighting against them. But here's the detail that almost no one notices, and that we'll explore further ahead. This state of alignment not only reduces emotional wear and tear, but creates a magnetic field around you. People notice you differently. Opportunities start to appear out of nowhere. Coincidences become more frequent. Is it coincidence? Or is it what some would call the law of attraction working in silence? What Watts shows us is that when you move in sync with the flow, even effort ceases to have that weight of battle. You act, but it's as if something greater is acting together, and this completely changes the way results come, because they stop coming by force and start coming by the perfect fit between what you are and what you seek. Next, we'll understand why this harmony isn't magic in the common sense of the word, but rather a predictable process, and proven by both ancestral wisdom and modern science. Alan Watts wasn't talking about cheap mysticism when he defended Wu Wei. What he said had a deep echo in neuroscience, although he himself rarely used that term. And this is where the bridge between ancestral wisdom and modern science begins to become visible. When you stop forcing, your brain leaves the state of hyper-alertness, that mode in which the amygdala, the region responsible for detecting threats, is constantly firing signals of urgency. In this state, your body releases more cortisol, your attention narrows, and your creativity is drastically reduced. In other words, you do act, but you act in survival mode, spending too much energy and getting worse results. Now, when you release excessive control, you activate neural networks associated with the flow state, a brain pattern observed in high-performance athletes, meditating monks, and even artists in full creative moment. In this condition, the prefrontal cortex functions in a more integrated way, connecting logical reasoning and intuition. You think better, feel better, and almost inevitably make decisions more aligned with your true goal. And here comes the point that so many associate with the so-called law of attraction. It's not that the universe magically moves pieces for you, although that's a beautiful metaphor. What happens is that by changing your internal state, you change the way you perceive and react to the external world. Situations that previously went unnoticed now jump out at you. People who could help appear by chance. And opportunities that seemed non-existent begin to be seen with clarity. Watts said that life is like a river. If you swim against it, you get tired. If you swim with it, you get where you want faster. And that's exactly what science confirms today. Internal alignment creates a type of mental energy economy that frees up resources to perceive more, act better, and yes, materialize what you want faster. But be careful. Don't confuse letting it flow with standing still waiting. In the next step, we'll talk about the subtlety that separates those who enter this creative and expansive flow and those who fall into the trap of inertia and stagnation, believing they are following Wu Wei. Alan Watts used to say that the wisdom of the East was misunderstood by the West, and he was right. Many listen to the idea of Wu Wei, acting without forcing, and interpret it as not acting. But in fact, it's the opposite. To understand, imagine an archer. He trains for years on posture, balance, breathing. At the moment of the shot, he's not thinking about every technical detail. He simply lets the body do what it already knows. This is not passivity, it's confidence in one's own preparation. Wu Wei is exactly that, acting with such internal alignment that the action seems natural, inevitable, as if it were already written. Neuroscience describes something similar in the so-called flow state. Research shows that in this state, the brain combines intense focus with mental relaxation. Electrical activity slows down in the frequency of alpha and theta waves, facilitating creative connections. You're not standing still. You're fully engaged, but without the tension that comes from fear or anxiety. When we confuse flow with inertia, we fall into a subtle trap. We wait for the universe to send signals while neglecting concrete actions that would lead us forward. It's like planting seeds and never watering them, believing that the rain will come. Yes, the rain may come, but if it doesn't, your harvest dies before it germinates. Here's the point that so many masters, from Lao Tzu to Jung, warned us about. True inner freedom is not absence of effort, but absence of unnecessary resistance. Jung said that what you resist persists, reminding us that the constant struggle against reality exhausts us. But he also saw the danger of complacency disguised as enlightenment, when the person believes they are at peace, but in reality is just avoiding the discomfort of growth. This is the mistake that empties the law of attraction for many. It's not enough to visualize, it's necessary to align intentions and actions, just like a river that flows. but whose banks were carefully built so that the water reaches the right destination. Wu Wei doesn't eliminate work. It transforms work into something that seems to be part of you, that fits like a piece that was always missing. And here's an almost mystical detail. When you find that point, the world seems to respond. It's not that the universe decides to help. It's that you begin to see with almost supernatural clarity the opportunities and resources that have always been around. It's as if suddenly the doors were all open, but you only realize this when you're walking in the right direction. In the next step, we'll explore how to align this internal vision with a clear purpose, preventing your flow from dispersing in 1,000 directions and ending up turning into disguised stagnation. Alan Watts reminded us that living is like playing an instrument. You don't play to finish the music as quickly as possible. You play to be inside the melody. The same goes for life. The goal is not to run to the end, but to dance in the right rhythm. However, there is a detail that differentiates those who simply flow from those who really transform their lives: purpose. Without it, even the most voluminous river ends up getting lost in the swamp. From the perspective of the law of attraction, purpose is the most stable frequency you can emit. It's not a goal that changes every week, but an internal state that guides every thought and action. When this frequency is clear, what you attract ceases to be random. It starts to have coherence with what you really want to build. Neuroscience observes that when a person has a strong and well-defined purpose, areas of the brain related to motivation, such as the striatum and the prefrontal cortex, enter into synchrony. This creates something similar to what spiritual masters describe as the mind and the heart walking together. And that's why so many ancient teachings insist on the union of reason and intuition. Without this convergence, action becomes dispersed and the flow is lost. Jung saw purpose as part of the individuation process, the path by which the individual integrates all their parts and finds a meaning that transcends the ego. At this stage, Wu Wei becomes more than a philosophy. It becomes a daily practice. You stop fighting against the tides you can't change and start rowing with precision in the direction you've chosen. And here arises a fascinating paradox. When you live aligned with purpose, it seems that less effort produces more result. Not because the universe does everything for you, but because your energy ceases to be wasted on paths that have nothing to do with who you really are. Everything that previously seemed like a struggle is transformed into a type of work that recharges instead of draining. In the financial plan, this translates into more accurate and lasting choices. People aligned with their purpose tend to say no to opportunities that don't resonate, even if they seem profitable in the short term. The result is a more solid and, paradoxically, faster growth than that obtained in the frantic race for immediate gain. If Wu Wei is the art of not forcing, purpose is the invisible map that prevents you from getting lost. And when these two elements meet, something rare happens. Your path is not only productive, it is inevitable. You become like a river that, even in the face of stones and curves, always finds a way to reach the sea. Now let's examine how to identify the subtle obstacles, internal and external, that can distort this flow, even when you think you're living in your purpose. It's not always the current that takes us away from our destination. Often it's the small ripples, almost imperceptible, that, when accumulated, change course without us realizing it. Alan Watts said that the real trap is not in the great shipwrecks, but in the subtle deviations that go unnoticed. And that's exactly where most people get lost. Not because they lack strength or knowledge, but because the direction was corrupted millimeter by millimeter, until there was no connection with the initial purpose. Neuroscience explains that our brain is programmed to seek quick rewards. Dopamine is the currency of motivation, but it can also be the saboteur of the long term. When you let yourself be carried away by immediate stimuli, praise, likes, small financial victories, you run the risk of exchanging the deep and consistent course for shortcuts that seem more comfortable. In spiritual language, it's as if a crystal-clear river were becoming cloudy with leaves and branches that fall along the way. These branches can be limiting beliefs inherited from the family, expectations imposed by society, or even models of success that have nothing to do with who you really are. Jung would call this invasion of the shadow, moments when unintegrated parts of your psyche take the helm, pushing you onto routes you didn't consciously choose. These routes in the beginning even seem seductive, but the longer you stay on them, the further you get from the point where Wu Wei and purpose meet. The law of attraction, when misunderstood, can become one of these deviations. Many believe that it's enough to desire for everything to align, but they end up focusing so much on the object of desire that they forget to align the internal state. The result is a life of intermittent efforts which never generate the expected harvest. The secret is to keep the internal compass calibrated, even when the world offers tempting shortcuts. It's a constant training of perception, of knowing when the smoothness of the flow has turned without realizing it into a push in the wrong direction. And it's curious how sometimes the alert doesn't come from a big shock, but from something as subtle as the feeling that something is out of place, even if everything seems to be working. When this feeling arises, few stop to listen. But those who recognize it early gain the chance to correct the course before the tide takes them to strange seas. Imagine yourself in the high seas with no land in sight. You have a sturdy boat, sails in good condition, and a constant wind blowing. Everything seems perfect until you realize that the compass that guides you is slightly misaligned. At first, 1 degree more or less doesn't seem like a big deal. But after days of travel, the difference takes you to a destination completely different from what you imagined. Alan Watts used to say that living without knowing yourself deeply is like sailing without realizing that the compass has been magnetized by invisible forces. These forces can be fear, vanity, the need for approval, things so ingrained that we've become accustomed to calling them personality. In the Tao Te Ching, Wu Wei is described as the art of acting without forcing. It's not passivity, but a state in which action is born from perfect attunement with the natural rhythm of life. To align the internal compass, it's necessary to rediscover this state. And here, neuroscience curiously confirms what the ancients already knew. When the brain enters flow, that mental state in which time seems to disappear, the areas associated with self-criticism and excessive control decrease their activity. It's at this point that your action becomes more precise, more natural, and paradoxically more powerful. But Jung reminds us, it's not enough to flow without direction. It's necessary to integrate the hidden parts of ourselves, recognize the shadows, and include them in the map. Ignoring them is like plotting a perfect route and forgetting that there are storms along the way. These internal storms, unresolved traumas, repeated patterns, unconscious beliefs, distort the compass even when the sea seems calm. Quantum physics offers a fascinating metaphor for this recalibration. Subatomic particles respond not only to external forces, but also to the simple act of observing them. In life, something similar happens. When you consciously observe a pattern that takes you away from the flow, it begins to lose strength. The simple act of perceiving transforms. But be careful, this observation is not judgment, it's presence. Judgment reinforces the distortion, presence dissolves it. Alan Watts would say that to align the compass, it's necessary to forget the effort of arriving, and paradoxically, this takes you exactly where you wanted to go. It's the law of attraction in its purest essence. Not that of trying to manipulate the universe with empty positive thinking, but that of vibrating in coherence with what you desire. And coherence means that mind, body, and spirit point in the same direction, without internal friction. Practicing this in everyday life doesn't require isolated temples or months-long retreats. It requires short but consistent moments in which you ask yourself, does this decision come from fear or trust? Am I trying to control or allow? This simple daily check is like slightly adjusting the compass needle so that it points again to true north. And the more you practice, the more you realize that true north is not a fixed place, but a dynamic alignment. Life changes, you change, and the flow changes together. Those who understand this stop clinging to rigid roots and learn to navigate by the attuned instinct, the one that is born from a calm mind, a clean heart, and an awakened spirit. The internal compass doesn't lie. When it points in the right direction, there is an unmistakable feeling, lightness. And lightness is not absence of challenge. It's the silent certainty that you are where you need to be, doing what needs to be done, at the exact moment it needs to happen. There's an almost invisible pattern in stories of downfall. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a spiritual master, a successful entrepreneur, or someone who seemed to have their personal life in order. Almost always, the collapse begins when the internal compass is ignored. Alan Watts used to compare this moment to a musician who, instead of listening to the orchestra, starts to follow only the metronome. The rhythm is right, but the music loses its soul. This is the trap of the mind that tries to control every detail. The execution remains impeccable on the outside, but on the inside, the sound no longer vibrates. Jung describes something similar as possession by the archetype. Damn, it's when a part of the psyche, such as the persona, the social role, or even the image of enlightened person, takes over everything and becomes confused with the real I. The person stops navigating by the living instinct and starts following a fixed script, unable to realize that they have moved away from the open sea. Neuroscience gives us a complementary view. When we live constantly in a state of stress or hyper-alertness, the cerebral amygdala takes command and hijacks the clarity of the prefrontal cortex, the area linked to conscious decisions and creativity. In other words, the internal navigation system gets stuck in the survival function, even if externally life seems under control. The result? Increasingly rigid movements, choices based on fear disguised as prudence, and a slow erosion of vitality. It's like a ship that, to avoid any risk of storm, decides never to leave the port again. Safe? Maybe. Alive? Not anymore. In the spiritual field, this can take subtle forms. The meditator who transforms the practice into a mechanical obligation, losing the liveliness of the experience. The seeker who clings to a guru or a doctrine as if they were the final destination, forgetting that they were just bridges. The student who accumulates books and courses but doesn't dare to apply anything in real life for fear of making mistakes. And in the material world, the same distortion manifests. The professional who has built a solid career but is emotionally exhausted, unable to celebrate achievements. The investor who, obsessed with security, misses clear opportunities for not trusting their own judgment. The creator who repeats formulas for success until emptying them because they fear experimenting with something new. Quantum physics offers here another powerful metaphor. At the subatomic level, particles trapped in the same state for too long begin to lose energy. What was stability becomes stagnation. And the same happens with human consciousness when it stops moving along with the flow. Alan Watts warned that life is like a river. If you try to hold it, it escapes through your fingers. The paradox is that absolute control, in fact, generates absolute loss of control. By ignoring the internal compass, the person doesn't realize that they are sailing in circles, increasingly distant from any real destination. And there's a silent danger here. The more time passes in this state, the harder it is to perceive the deviation. The discomfort is rationalized, the decisions are justified, and the personal narrative becomes an armor that blocks any insight. It's what Jung would call self-imposed blindness, an unconscious refusal to look at what is misaligned. But there is always a decisive moment. Sometimes it arrives as an external crisis, the loss of a job, the end of a relationship, an unexpected illness. Other times it's a silent, almost imperceptible instant, a look in the mirror and the sudden perception that the sparkle in the eyes has disappeared. This is life's invitation to take back the helm, to recalibrate the compass and remember that the route is not fixed and that the sea has never stopped being open. And perhaps, by understanding this point, you realize that the real risk was never missing the path, but refusing to navigate. There's a point in the journey where something changes, but it's not an achievement. It doesn't come from effort, nor from a perfect plan. It's more subtle than that. It's when you realize that the flow has started to carry you again, and that for the first time in a long time, you're not resisting it. Alan Watts said that life is dance, not march. And the problem with most people is wanting the dance to follow their own rigid steps, as if existence were a military ritual. But the dance of life only works when you get into the rhythm, and that never happens by force. When you insist on leading all the time, you lose the beat. Quantum physics, once again, supports this invisible logic. Experiments demonstrate that the simple act of observing alters the behavior of particles. In other words, the universe responds to our attention, but also demands surrender. Observing too much, controlling too much, focusing too much can collapse the possibilities and block the fluidity of what would come naturally. Jung saw this moment as the integration of the unconscious, the instant when the ego stops fighting against what is hidden. And with that, the true self can finally emerge. Consciousness expands, not because you pushed it to do so, but because you finally removed the blocks from the path. This type of transformation is silent. It doesn't have fireworks. Sometimes nobody notices, but you know, because life starts to seem lighter. The cycles that previously repeated themselves dissolve. People who drained you disappear. Doors that were closed for years open effortlessly. Not because you forced it, but because you got out of the way. It's when the true law of attraction comes into action. Not that of repetitive decrees, nor of forced visualizations, but the one that works as real vibrational resonance. You become what you desire, and therefore what you desire finds you. It's not magic, it's physics, and it's spiritual. Because what you attract when you're in flow is different from what you try to conquer when you're in struggle. At this point, something very curious usually happens. The people around you say that you were lucky, that things started to work out of nowhere. But what they don't see is the internal process, the dismantling of control, the abandonment of masks, the facing of the void. You didn't get lucky. You became true, and the world responded to that. Alan Watts called this the wisdom of insecurity. It's when you accept uncertainty as an ally, when you stop fearing the unpredictable, and finally understand that control was never the basis of stability, but rather its greatest enemy. If you feel that you're reaching this point, honor it. Don't accelerate. Don't turn it into a method. Just observe. Because when everything changes effortlessly, it's a sign that your essence has finally taken the helm. And the universe recognizes the leadership of those who no longer need to prove anything. It's curious. When you're in the middle of chaos, all you want is peace. But when peace arrives, many people find the silence strange. It seems empty. It seems like something is missing, but perhaps what's missing is just the agitation that you confused with presence, the constant struggle that you confused with purpose, the noise that you confused with life. Silence is not absence. It's effortless presence. It's the sound of the universe when it has already understood who you are. In the esoteric tradition, there is talk about disidentification. The idea that the true self only reveals itself when you abandon the theater, the roles, the fears, the masks. Wu Wei is not passivity. It's the movement that is born from harmony. It's the action that comes from alignment with the Tao, the cosmic flow that sustains everything. You still act, but you don't fight. You still dream, but you don't force. You still desire, but you don't beg. Life doesn't bend to commands, it responds to states. And when your inner state is of truth, clarity and surrender, what comes to you carries the same vibration. This is the law of attraction that the ancients knew before it was sold as an empty promise. It's not about visualizing cars, mansions or figures. It's about becoming a vibrational field that magnetizes everything that is in coherence with your essence. You don't chase after. You become the path, and that is the true power, not the one that shouts, but the one that transforms without needing to show off. Alan Watts said that the greatest challenge of the human being is learning to trust in life without needing to control it. And this is the paradox of freedom. It is only born when you give up on holding it. If this message touched something in you, perhaps it's not by chance. Perhaps you're ready to stop pushing and start flowing. If you've made it this far, write in the comments, "I trust the flow." It's your symbolic way of declaring to the universe that you understood, that you feel, and that you're ready to become who you already are. And if this journey resonated with your soul, leave your like, your subscription, and share this video with someone who still struggles too much, when all they need is to start letting go. See you in the next video.